Kerry warns Syria Assad must go, and he calls on the opposition to join talks. You're with the Arise News Hour. Our lead story tonight, at last there's talk about talks in Syria. After dozens, many of them children, were killed in Aleppo at the weekend, the new Secretary of State issues America's strongest warning.
We condemn this indiscriminate killing of innocent civilians, and we condemn it in the strongest terms. And it is just further evidence that Assad has to go.
Also in the program tonight, the fighting in Mali goes on. This is what the French say is the final phase. Also, a peace accord, but not necessarily the peace accord in Congo. And from Hollywood, a few records, a lot of glamour, miles of red carpet, and a win for Africa at the Oscars.
US Secretary of State John Kerry says the Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad has to go. In America's strongest warning yet, Kerry said his regime had rained down rockets on the people of Aleppo in the last few days, and he condemned what he described as the indiscriminate killing of civilians.
Now, the new Secretary of State was in London at the start of a Europe and Middle East tour. He called on the Syrian opposition to join a summit in Rome this week. They say they'll boycott it. It comes just after the Syrian foreign minister said he was ready to join the opposition for talks. Nick Jennings has more.
The civil war rages on in Syria with seemingly endless slaughter on both sides. Dozens of civilians were killed in the city of Aleppo over the weekend after government forces allegedly fired Russian-made missiles into the Ard al-Hamra neighbourhood. Amid the widespread carnage and destruction, are fresh signs emerging that the regime may at last be ready to sit down and talk to its opponents. In a significant shift in position, the Syrian foreign minister in Moscow today said his government was prepared to sit down and talk, even with those who have weapons in their hand. But in London today, perhaps the strongest words yet from the Obama administration, with the new Secretary of State John Kerry laying down a clear warning that Assad must go.
The Assad regime has rained down rockets on Aleppo in recent days, and that is just the latest example of Assad's brutality. We condemn this indiscriminate killing of innocent civilians, and we condemn it in the strongest terms. And it is just further evidence that Assad has to go.
There will be a lot of focus on Kerry's visit to the Middle East this week to see if there's any real political momentum to break the impasse in the ongoing crisis in Syria and end the bloodshed. Nick Jennings, Arise News.
Well, after 8 weeks fighting al-Qaeda-backed militants, the French President François Hollande said that his army's campaign in Mali is in the final phase. But many Malians fear the worst could be yet to come. Arise News' Will Took has the story.
In Paris, the flags flew at half-mast. They were commemorating Staff Sergeant Harold Vormelise as he was laid to rest with full military honours. He was part of the 4,000-strong French force sent to Mali to rid the country of Islamist rebels. As France prepares to exit after its 2-month-long campaign, serious questions remain over the condition the country is being left in. With recent suicide bombings in Thessaly and Kidal, security forces are increasingly facing guerrilla-style tactics. And this fierce fighting in Gao highlights the fact safety still hasn't returned to Mali's northern regions. French and Malian troops battled for hours to clear the town hall where jihadists had taken refuge. After the firefight was won, specialists spent time clearing the area of landmines and improvised explosive devices. The weaponry found at battle sites like this points to a well-equipped fighting force. This arsenal was seized in Gao over the last few weeks. Amongst the cash, RPGs from China, Senegalese police-issued guns, even rifles and ammunition from rebels who defected from the Malian military.
This gives us the idea that we are faced by an army, by organizations that have the capacity of an army, of a whole army. These are important means of destruction.
The fear now is surviving militants have fled across Mali's poorly guarded borders and could just as easily return.
The perception we had of this conflict was a little too simplistic, but every day that goes by we realise that it's more and more complex. All the countries from the Sahel-Saharan area are now represented among the jihadists.
As the inhabitants of Gao clean up after the latest round of fighting, any declaration of victory seems premature. Will Took, Arise News.
For more, we're joined live in the studio by Susie Dennison, author of The EU, Algeria and the Northern Mali Question. Susie, I guess the first and obvious question is, isn't this withdrawal by the French sometime next week, which is March, I guess, isn't it a little premature?
Well, I think the French government has been very clear since the beginning of their intervention that they wanted to pull out as soon as practicable and as soon as they had secured the urban areas and the situation on the ground. I think that, that now we are entering what the French see as the final phase in which they will be leading in the conflict. But they've already been fighting alongside Chadian troops and of course the Malian forces themselves. And I think that what we will see now is that they will start to hand over to the African-led force, AFISMA, and plans are certainly underway too for a peacekeeping force, UN mandated as soon as the situation is secure enough. So I don't think that we've seen the end of the conflict in Mali, but we will be moving to a new phase.
But indeed, is there ever a right time for the French to leave? I mean, putting a date on it doesn't necessarily make it the right time.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think that the first weeks of the intervention were relatively smooth and successful, but we have seen just in the last week rather heavier fighting with casualties on both sides. Now, I don't think the French government anticipate that they will be pulling out completely. Certainly in the discussions which are going on at UN level at the moment, they're talking about leaving a French base in Mali on a much longer term basis. So I think that presence will continue. But certainly they have secured the urban areas, and in terms of the military objectives which they set themselves at the beginning, that was the priority for them. But clearly security in the country will be very hard won.
The other thing I've noticed, Susie, is that there seems a disparity between what Malian forces are saying on the ground and French forces are saying. There's a bit of a disconnect, if you will.
Yeah, and I think that inevitably the situation on the ground it differs in different parts of the country, and in a war situation that those lines of communication can sometimes get a bit blurred. I mean, I don't think that either party are under any illusions about how easy this is going to be now, in terms of either ensuring stability in the country itself, or ensuring development of the country and reconstruction in the post-conflict phase. I mean, these are major challenges that we've seen ahead, and we've had warnings this week from aid agencies about the fact that it's actually got more difficult since the intervention began to get supplies to the north of the country.
Has the nature of the conflict changed now? They've got the rebels out of the town, but it's now become more of a guerrilla warfare, a guerrilla conflict, hasn't it?
The main focus of the fighting has now moved to the mountainous region in the north, where estimates about how many thousands of the rebel groups are hiding vary, but yes, clearly the terrain has changed, and that nature has changed, and what will be critical now will be getting troops involved who have experience of that kind of fighting.
Susie, the other thing, I saw an FT article last week saying that those mountain regions that you talk about could be France's Tora Bora. And I think this is what France is trying to avoid, being there for the long term. Do you agree?
Yeah,
being drawn in, being dragged in?
Yeah, I mean, I think comparisons are always difficult because clearly the very specific circumstances vary from conflict to conflict. But it does seem that the French government is being very careful about managing that comparison and trying to ensure that as soon as they can, they hand over to that peacekeeping force under the umbrella of the UN.
Susie Dennison.
Thanks very much indeed for that. Right. Well, the Paralympic gold medal winner Oscar Pistorius reported to authorities today as part of his bail condition. He avoided reporters, but there was continuing speculation about the events of Valentine's Day that led to Pistorius being charged with murdering his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp, including newspaper claims about the bloody cricket bat found inside his home. Arise News' Gavin Hill has the details.
Oscar Pistorius, out on bail, is driven from the home of his uncle to comply with the conditions set by the magistrate who freed him. He must report to police twice a week until the start of his trial for murdering his girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp. The Paralympian is accused of shooting the law graduate and model to death through a toilet door in the bathroom of his home. He mistook her for an intruder, he says. But there are unconfirmed reports that police told Steenkamp's family that he smashed her head in with a cricket bat before he shot her. Pistorius has admitted using the cricket bat to break down the toilet door. And the shock revelations keep coming. It's emerged that Pistorius' brother Carl, who'd supported him in court, is charged with killing a female motorcyclist in a road incident in Johannesburg in 2008. He'll stand trial for culpable homicide and faces up to 15 years in jail. Prosecutors have accused him of reckless driving. Meanwhile, there have been allegations that Pistorius had a problem with aggression. Mark Batchelor, who played football for South Africa, claims Pistorius threatened him with physical violence after he intervened in a row over a woman Pistorius had previously dated. Although Pistorius has been released on bail, he's not free to return to the home where he killed his girlfriend. He's had to surrender his guns and his passport, and he's not allowed to drink alcohol nor take drugs. He's due back in court in June. Gavin Hill, Arise News.
To the business news now, and the creation of a financial powerhouse which aims to rival Africa's best. As usual, our economics and business editor Michael Wilson joins us in the studio with that and more business stories. Michael.
Thanks, Jeff. It's being described as the birth of a pan-African banking giant. Investors in South Africa's third largest bank, ABSA, have finally backed a $2.1 billion plan to buy the African operations of Barclays Bank. The deal will see Barclays relinquish control of 8 of its operations on the continent in exchange for 1.29.5 million new shares in ABSA. That will increase Barclays' stake in the bank from 55.5% to 62.3%, with the merger expected to give ABSA greater exposure to the fast-growing African markets. It is quite complicated. I'm joined now by Stuart Theobald, an analyst with Intellidex. I mean, in simple terms, what will ABSA get from this, first of all?
Well, it's operations in 8 different countries. Most of those, well, only one of them hasn't had any operations in before. So it's uniting a network around ABSA, which is considerably larger than the rest of Barclays operations in Africa, into trying to create something that is more a coherent whole that the business can use to grow and drive growth for its banks.
I mean, obviously, we were waiting to get a result from the minority shareholders, but it was a shoo-in, wasn't it? I mean, they were never going to say no. But it actually is quite complicated, isn't it? Because Barclays is the seller.
Yes.
And yet it's the controlling shareholder of the buyer. Now, how's all that going to work?
That's right. I mean, it's 8 different jurisdictions. So you've got a whole host of different regulatory processes to follow. You've had ABSA as the 55% shareholder of ABSA. Well, Barclays is the 55% shareholder of ABSA. And then all of these entities in the 8 different markets, which are a variety of different stories with each one of them. Some have minority shareholders of their own in each of those markets. So it's been a very complex transaction to put together. But you're right, as both seller and buyer, Barclays has had to take a careful corporate governance approach to this. And the main way that's happened is that within ABSA, it's really been minority shareholders there who've had to approve the deal. And today's vote was left to minority shareholders alone without Barclays involved. As
with all these things, whether it be banking or automobiles and so on, somebody's got to keep an eye on the core values of the business, haven't they? Will Barclays be able to do that, do you think?
Barclays has so far shown has been a very attentive controlling shareholder of ABSA. There is a very close interaction that's constantly going on between the management level of ABSA and the management level of Barclays. I think this transaction shuffles the cards around a bit. It's been a little, for the last decade, a little bit confusing about how Barclays, or what its long-term strategic intent is for its Africa business. But this transaction finally makes it very clear that it sees Johannesburg and ABSA as the kind of fulcrum of all of its Africa operations. So now the pressure will be on ABSA to ensure that it can really develop those and to derive value from that African business.
Now, as you know, in the so-called developed economies, there's this problem with banks actually lending money. You know, everybody wants them to lend to get businesses going. So, are we, do you think, going to see an increase in retail lending and SME, small business lending in Africa as a result of this?
I think that's a very good question. In a lot of the markets that Barclays has been operating, you'll find, for example, no home loans. I mean, in countries like Ghana, there is no developed home loan market. That is an obvious constraint on economic activity because people can't really buy houses except by saving and buying them cash. Now, ABSA has obviously significant experience in home loan lending. It's one of the biggest home loan banks in South Africa and a great deal of retail experience. So I'm sure that part of the strategy will be thinking of ways to inject those kind of products into some of these markets. And that's really where the opportunity for growth lies. And I'm sure there will be political enthusiasm for that to happen because it does have a positive economic impact on those markets. But there's always tricky regulatory problems in each of them to deal with.
Stuart Theobald, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, as you'll most likely know by now, Britain has lost its treasured AAA credit rating. It's been seen as a bloody nose for Finance Minister George Osborne, and unsurprisingly, sterling has been on the floor with maybe further to go. But what does this mean for Africa's leading companies? Well, our correspondent Sidi Bishop has more from Johannesburg.
The worry was mainly in South Africa, but because the markets had priced it in a long time ago, they had anticipated that the economy in England could be downgraded, but the timing was a little bit strange for them. They didn't expect the market to be downgraded yet. They had hope that maybe it might take longer, but it happened sooner than they had expected. In terms of the sterling, is the issue of the exchange rate weakness against the sterling. As you know, that Britain and Europe are our main trading partners. The weakness in the sterling could boost the rand, but in this case, it did not even boost the rand, which was really bizarre in the markets.
What about, I mean, however Europe actually plays out and the Italy elections and so on, what are African businesses actually looking at in the Eurozone?
The African markets are looking at somebody who will say, I am heeding to the austerity measures. I am going to follow the austerity measures to the latter, because any discrepancy or anybody who will come in and scupper the progress that has been taken by Italy in adhering to austerity measures could affect the stability of our trade with Europe, of our trade with Italy, because once the Italian economy doesn't recover to an extent that ours can actually benefit with exports to Italy, we are bound to suffer. And as far as other African markets are concerned, the lack there is the fact that they do not actually export as much as South Africa would to Italy or other European trading partners. But some of the countries in Africa are actually self-sufficient. Some they trade together, border to border, or they trade with China, or they would trade with the US. So South Africa is highly exposed to Europe, as Europe is its major trading partner. So it will be highly affected by what happens to the sterling or the economy in Europe as we're seeing right now.
Sidi, thank you very much indeed. OK, so in equity markets, South Africa started the week on a positive note. Stocks in Johannesburg gained as banks and platinum miners rallied. One of the top lenders, Nedbank, posted a 19% jump in full-year earnings due to success in its retail business. But the mood was less buoyant in Nigeria and Kenya. Traders there ended the session in the red. South Africa's rand was at its strongest in more than a week against the dollar, but there won't be much movement really ahead of the budget on Wednesday. The naira was unchanged as demand from importers was countered by dollar inflows from offshore investors buying local debt. The shilling edged up against the dollar after the central bank further reduced the volume of funds around the money markets. The gold price rose a little on rallying stock markets and a broadly lower dollar, but investors are cautious ahead of the Fed and the United States Chairman Ben Bernanke's testimony to Congress later this week. Brent crude rose also on a weaker dollar, but is felt to be vulnerable to any hints of weakness in the global economy, particularly, as we've been saying, in the Eurozone. Wheat fell to an 8-month low on improving conditions in the United States growing area, which added to expectations of a sharp recovery in the global grain supply this year. And staying with that, officials in Egypt insist they still have the funds to keep the nation supplied with bread, despite a sharp decline in wheat imports. The state says it's allocating priority financing for wheat imports in spite of a rising budget and falling currency reserves. It's also said to be pinning hopes on an increase in domestic production. Foreign traders and financiers are sceptical, saying the country only has around 3 months of supply of wheat left. They say a lack of grain ships arriving at Egyptian ports is evidence that the state grain supplier, that's the General Authority for Supply Commodities, is having problems maintaining imports. That's the business for now. Still to come, putting Sudan on the right track to power its engine of growth. And yes, that is about railways, just in case you didn't get it from the... You know.
He's still got AAA rating with us, though.
Yes, indeed, Michael.
Oh, thank you.
No downgrading. Not yet.
Okay.
Well, Niger is one step closer to becoming a regional HQ for US drone activity. And American troops will be leaving parts of Afghanistan after President Hamid Karzai accused them of abusing their power on the ground. We'll cross now live to Washington, where Arise correspondent Colin Campbell has the details. Hello, Colin. Let's start with the Afghan story. Is there an embarrassment in Washington, or indeed the Pentagon, of what Hamid Karzai is asking?
Good evening. Yeah, there is somewhat of egg on the face of some of the U.S. officials here because of the involvement that they thought that they were leading in Afghanistan. And now for the president to say that U.S. forces would have to leave some key areas of Maidan Wardak, an area where U.S. has built up their forces to fight the Taliban. And if this ban does take effect, it would take effect in about 2 weeks. So this is something that the president, Hamid Karzai, wants to happen rather quickly. I mean, if you think about it, 14 days for a bulk of U.S. forces to actually scale back is a big operation. But obviously, this is a huge concern to him. This is, of course, over American Special Operations Forces and Afghan troops who are working with those special forces. They're accused of torturing and killing people within the Afghan communities. So, of course, this raises alarms for the president and Afghanistan officials. This also shows that that officials there want the U.S. and the Taliban to take more responsibility for a lot of the violence and destruction that's happening in the country. And there's supposed to be a coalition that is going to be assembled in the next few days to investigate these allegations.
Indeed. Has there been any hard evidence coming of these allegations?
Well, there have been some eyewitness accounts. I'm not sure about any pictures or anything, but there have been people that are speaking to Afghanistan officials about what happened, and in quite vivid detail.
Now, troops are preparing to leave anyway at the end of 2014. Do you think this might accelerate general troop withdrawal from the region?
Well, that's something that the White House is playing with right now. If there will be an earlier withdrawal of troops from that region. They haven't made any definitive announcements on this, but I do know that the White House has talked about this, and they're evaluating the situation as we speak.
Well, let's move to another area of conflict. And what's the latest on these plans for a drone base in Niger?
Yeah, this is something that we've talked about for the past several weeks at Arise, and something that's been in the headlines for the past several weeks. This is the U.S. troops, about 100 U.S. troops are now in Niger. There were a group sent late last week. This is a drone base that will be set up there that will house Predator drones that will be used for surveillance. The White House says that these drones will not be armed, but the troops who are being sent there will be armed. And this shows that the U.S. is prioritizing Africa and helping to battle Al-Qaeda and affiliated forces. And of course it wants to show its solidarity with France in trying to battle and push back or try to decimate those forces in Mali. And these troops would include Air Force logistics specialists, intel analysts, and security officers. There may be more troops involved there in months to come, but the White House has not said any major announcements regarding that so far.
Of course, we've had a lot of interest in John Kerry's first foreign visit. He's in London at the moment, and his pronouncements on Syria that President Assad has to go. How's it playing in Washington, his first foreign trip?
Well, so far, so good. I think what the White House wants to do here is they want Friends of Syria to attend the meeting towards the end of the week, because the Friends of Syria, the opposition group to the Syrian government, has already voiced their concerns for what they say is a lack of international support, and they said that they wouldn't be a part of these meetings. And I think with Kerry's announcement and standing in solidarity with Hague, that this would hopefully influence them to be a part of these meetings and to be a part of these discussions. The White House has also said they're playing with the logistics and what they would do to help supply opposition members with more resources. They haven't made an announcement on this, but we do know this is something that they're evaluating right now. This is something they're taking very seriously, and they're so far happy with Kerry's performance, and they expect to see a lot more from him later this week.
Colin, thanks very much indeed for joining us. That's Colin Campbell, our Washington correspondent. Jeff.
Thank you, Heather. Now, 30 people are shot to death in the United States every single day. Almost half of those are young black males. Most are killed by other young black men. Caroline Grusang meets some of the people behind those statistics.
I was 20.
Every Tuesday afternoon at Washington Hospital, this group of men meets to talk about life, bound to a wheelchair. All are paralyzed, victims of a bullet that spared their lives but changed them forever.
I was coming from the club. My friends at the car waiting for me because I was talking to this girl, and they rushed me to come get in the car, and I had to get in the car and pull off. As soon as I pull off, I blank out.
38-year-old Kwame was only 25 when he was shot. He's one of thousands of black men injured or killed every year in gun-related violence. With nearly 300 million privately owned firearms across the U.S., Americans are the most powerfully armed civilians in the world. Mass killings, like the Newtown school shooting that left 20 young children and 6 adults dead, always stir the debate on U.S. gun laws. But experts say these massacres don't reflect the real problem.
The reality of gun violence in the United States is that it is concentrated in the inner cities, among the poor, and the victims are disproportionately, overwhelmingly young black and Hispanic men.
More than 30 people are shot and killed every day in America, and nearly half of them are black, mostly killed by other black men. After a youth marred by crime, Ish was shot in 1998 by an armed robber. One bullet grazed his head, and another ripped through his neck. He was lucky to survive and says he's learned a hard lesson.
It's not worth it. Just think first before you react, you know, because once you get punished, it's no way out. It's easy to get in trouble, but it's hard to get out.
Homicides were the leading cause of death among 10 to 24-year-old African Americans in 2012. And since the Newtown shooting in December, more than 2,000 men and women have been shot and killed. Sobering statistics that reflect the nationwide problem of gun violence.
You're watching the Arise News Hour. The main stories this evening. And the US Secretary of State John Kerry has said Syrian leader Assad must go and called on the opposition to attend a peace summit in Rome later this week. They are boycotting the talks. At the weekend, dozens died in Aleppo, many of them children. In Mali, heavy fighting has continued after the French government said the conflict was entering its final phase. And a peace accord has been signed to try and end the fighting in the Democratic Republic of Congo, brokered by the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon at a conference attended by 7 countries.
Now, the 85th Annual Academy Awards included a surprise appearance from First Lady Michelle Obama and some surprise winners as well. Edward Lawrence is in Los Angeles with the night's big winners.
The stars partied into the night with A-list celebrities and Oscar himself.
I've got to get up at 6, so and one glass of champagne and I'm gone these days.
Even the nominees who didn't win appeared to be having a good time.
Argo!
The First Lady announced the top honor as Argo won the Best Picture award. This is the second Oscar win for Ben Affleck, the film's producer and director.
I never thought that I would be back here, and I am, because of so many of you who are here tonight.
This is only the fourth time the Best Picture winner was not nominated for Best Director.
Ang Lee.
Ang Lee took that honor for Life of Pi, which won 4 awards, the most of any movie. But Hollywood history was made when the Academy awarded Daniel Day-Lewis with the Best Actor trophy. He's the first male 3-time winner of the statue.
And the Oscar goes to Daniel Day-Lewis.
Meryl Streep, another 3-time winner, presented the award.
I had actually been committed to play Margaret Thatcher. And Meryl was Stephen's first choice for Lincoln.
Jennifer Lawrence won for Best Actress for playing a troubled widow who dances her way to love in Silver Linings Playbook. But she wasn't as light on her feet while accepting the honor.
What went through my mind when I fell down? A bad word.
But any embarrassment seemed to fade away as she celebrated during the many after parties.
Well, from Los Angeles, Edward Lawrence gave us the Oscars lowdown. Edward, any surprises this year for you?
Well, Heather, there weren't many surprises in this award ceremony, but if you had to pick one, it would have been for Best Director. Ang Lee won for Life of Pi. However, many people, critics and otherwise, thought that Steven Spielberg would take that award for his role or his work in Lincoln.
And what about Ben Affleck? How unusual is it for him to have won the Best Picture and not the Best Director? He wasn't even nominated.
He wasn't nominated. A little bit of a shun from the Academy. He did win he won Best Director in some other awards that they had here, but him winning Best Picture, I think Ben Affleck even said that he was stunned and surprised that his picture had won, or his role, Argo, had won Best Picture.
What was the highlight of the whole ceremony for you?
For me, the highlight was actually a stumble. Jennifer Lawrence's stumble when she was going up for her Best Actress award. She had won the award. And if you watch the bottom of the screen as she stumbles, you can see Hugh Jackman jump out of his seat and run over to try and help her. It really shows what type of person he is and the warmth that you felt there. But it also shows that Jennifer Lawrence is, you know, maybe a little human. She's had a very good run recently with the Hunger Games and Silver Linings Playbook and the awards that she's won. So this shows that she's a little bit human for the rest of us.
So Hugh Jackman obviously got the award for the Best Gentleman, but did she manage to act her way out of the embarrassment of it?
Yeah, she was able to, she did a very good job actually. She mentioned the fall to make light of it in the beginning of her speech, but then went right on. It really didn't faze her at all, which shows her maturity at just 22 years old.
Now, Daniel Day-Lewis not only made history by also recreating history. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Daniel Day-Lewis made significant history, actually. He's the first male actor now to win Best Actor 3 times. Meryl Streep was the one who handed that award to him, and she's won Best Actress 3 times. So Daniel Day-Lewis really did an excellent job in his role as Lincoln. As I understand, actually, he stayed in that role 24 hours a day during the filming in order to nail that role. And, you know, the Academy awarded him now with his 3rd Best Actor award.
And what about the gesture of the Oscars towards the Bond, 50 years of Bond movies? In the past, they've sort of ignored the franchise.
Exactly. It was nice to see that they actually did this tribute to them. However, I've heard a lot of critics actually say that the hype was there, but it just kind of fizzled out. You had a lot of, in the clips, you saw a lot of Sean Connery, you saw a lot of Daniel Craig, but Roger Moore really didn't play a significant role. And as you know, Roger Moore played James Bond 7 times. Some people felt that he should have been in a little bit more than he was. Also, all of the people who played Bonds, the actors, are still living. So there are some folks who would like to have seen all of them on stage together. This was really about the music as it was, or more about the music than it was really the movies.
And finally, any red carpet moments? Anybody there for all the right reasons got, or anybody there for the wrong reasons?
Yeah, don't we love to talk about the red carpet and what people are wearing? You know, Naomi Watts, I think, hit a home run. Her dress was amazing. It revealed in the right parts. It also covered up the right parts and just fit her very well. It was different enough to where it stood out from any other dress, but eloquent enough. You know, when you talk about worst dress, I think Anne Hathaway's name comes up a lot. I've heard one of the fashion critics say she belongs in the "what were you thinking" category. The seams on her dress actually, you know, came up and looked like nipples. You know, during the course of the award, she did change dresses, but yeah, she definitely gets the best dress, or worst dressed.
And here's a gentle reminder, we will have more on the Oscars later in the show, but first, here's a roundup of the other stories making headlines today. The ballots are being counted in Italy following 2 days of voting. Early exit polls indicate the center-left Democratic Party has won the most seats, but official results aren't due until later today or tomorrow. Italians and international investors have been closely watching the race. Fresh protests broke out on the streets of Dhaka on Sunday. Islamist demonstrators gathered again in the Bangladeshi capital, and police say the clashes have left at least 3 people dead. Tensions are high at the start of war crimes trials against members of the Islamist party. And history was made in South Korea today after the country's first female president was sworn in. Park Chung-hee took the oath of office during a 2.5-hour ceremony in Seoul. The 61-year-old is the daughter of a military leader who ruled South Korea for 18 years. Park demanded that North Korea end its nuclear ambitions immediately.
See any Gangnam Style there with Psy doing his thing.
He did perform, though.
Really?
He did perform at that ceremony.
Catching the mood, yes.
Indeed.
Well, it's Wilson Style now. It's the business news.
Michael Gangnam Style.
Thank you all. It is nice of you. Now, on Wall Street, some early gains, but really being wiped off and out because of worries about the Italian election. You see, it does that Eurozone worry go straight across the Atlantic. Well, for more on that, let's cross live to our correspondent, Chitra Norbat in New York. Chitra, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Michael. How are you doing?
Club, don't we? Because we've lost our AAA rating, and you lost your AAA rating last year, courtesy of Standard & Poor's. Did it have any effect at all on your economy?
Michael, actually, the U.S. lost its credit rating in 2011. And did anyone notice? Not really. The markets, they're at 5-year highs. The economy is slowly recovering, and the U.S. is still very credit worthy. Right when the downgrade happened in 2011, interest rates did decline, but they were already very low. The U.S. central banks, they've been buying up billions of dollars in bonds since then, and this keeps money in the economy. They've been keeping interest rates low. So on the ground, there hasn't been too much of an effect from the U.S. credit downgrade.
Neatly answering the question there, all about that. Now, a deal on the deficit ticks on, doesn't it? What's the latest progress? Because the clock is ticking, really, isn't it?
The clock is ticking, Michael. They've been meeting, talking, pontificating, but not too much action. The sequestration is coming March the 1st unless President and the Congress strike a deal. And sequestration, that's the fancy word for the mandatory spending cuts. Federal programs will have their budgets reduced by about $85 billion, and this represents about 2% of the budget. Defense will see big spending cuts, along with the FBI, border security, and disaster recovery. Federal agencies, they're already responding to this by slowing down their hiring, slowing down contracting. And government officials, they're worried because they do believe that these spending cuts will dampen the economy and job growth.
It's all, isn't it? You feel, though, that politicians really do need to reach some sort of agreement fairly quickly, don't you? From what you're saying, it looks like it's going to drag on.
They have to. I mean, the whole country feels a sense of urgency. We want that to go more into Washington. You know, the Congress, they did pass that No Budget, No Pay Act if they don't get conclusions on each of these sequestration as well as the debt ceiling. So hopefully they stick to that.
Together in a room and standing room only, and get them to do it, and don't feed them or water them until they reach a decision. Now, finally, Apple wants to get into India. Well, sort of.
That's right.
The way they do.
That's right. Apple wants to make a new push into India with their iPhone. India is the world's second largest cell phone market by users, and they're growing. So Apple wants to go after this. They're expanding sales and marketing in India, and they're even offering monthly payment plans to customers because the iPhone is very expensive there. In India, most people can't afford expensive cell phones, and the mobile carriers, they don't offer rebates like they do in other parts of the world, like the United States. So to give you a sense, if we were entry-level software engineers in India, we could get an iPhone if we save up about 2 months of our salary. So it's quite the investment indeed.
Indeed it is, Chitra. Thanks very much indeed. Now, as far as the London market is concerned, FTSE 100 unmoved by the ratings downgrade, since a large proportion of the company's earnings listed on it come from overseas, which could trigger some benefits as sterling weakens. Sterling's taken a kicking, as I said, as everyone thought it would after Moody's downgrade of the UK. More falls are on the cards as the outlook for the UK economy is grim and more monetary easing looks likely. This year, the pound is already down 7% against the dollar and 7.5% against the euro. Planes, trains and automobiles are all essential for any working economy, and Sudan is hoping for a revival of its railway system, hoping it'll help stimulate growth. The country used to be home to Africa's largest rail network, with more than 5,000 kilometres of track, but years of mismanagement have taken their toll. Now, with a little help from China, Sudan's trains are taking to the track once again. Sarah Hemranjani has the story.
Here, in the scorching desert heat, lies the rusting remains of Sudan's once great railway network. Some of these decaying engines and coaches are more than 50 years old and were shipped over from Europe and the United States. Sudan's rail system used to be hailed as pioneering. However, after decades of economic turmoil and neglect, most of it is now out of service. But that could be about to change, thanks to a lifeline from China. Beijing is Sudan's biggest aid donor and has promised to resurrect the East African nation's rail industry.
The efforts being put into recovery have not been seen for several years, but gradually things will move this year, and we'll come out of this emergency stage and enter into the activating stage to advance the standards of Sudan railways, as is our hope.
While work on new tracks has already begun, the plans need huge investment to succeed. Still, the Sudanese government is betting the long-term returns will more than compensate for the cost. Modern railway infrastructure will boost exports and trade across the region, and that will help kickstart growth in Sudan's sputtering economy. Sarah Hemranjani, Arise News.
You know, no programme should be transmitted without some train stuff. They're fantastic, aren't they, trains? You love them. When I was a kid, used to stand on the end of a platform in short trousers and school uniform, and used to put pennies on the line. Don't try this at home, it's really dangerous. But and the train would go over them, they come out about that size. Oh. Did you not stand at the end of a platform and collect the numbers? What were you doing as a youth?
Only nerds do that.
Chasing girls and drinking beer, was that what it was?
Exactly.
I'm not answering that question.
Good man. Talk to you later.
Michael, you're going to join us later for some frock talk, right?
Love it.
Oscars, etc. You're going to love this next story, Michael.
Thank you.
Take this out. Now, a Ugandan scientist has found a way to halt the rapid deforestation in his country. Moses Sanga has invented a new way to make charcoal from sugarcane waste, make that. And as Will Davis reports, he aims to get 250 million trees planted by 2020.
When Moses Sanga was a young boy, he lived near a huge forest in western Kenya. After seeking his fortune abroad, he returned home one day to discover his younger sister skipping school, not to play, but to collect firewood for cooking. The nearby woodland had been decimated by the local population, who cut down the trees for fuel. Moses immediately quit his job and invested all of his savings in developing an alternative fuel, biochar.
Now, biochar is simply converting biomass into a powder called char that could work as an organic fertilizer, but it can also be compressed into fuel, and the fuel burns as good as charcoal from wood.
1/3 of Uganda's tree cover has disappeared in the last 2 decades. Environmentalists warn that unless things change quickly, much of the forest will disappear within 40 years.
People invade the forest, they clear them, they cut them down, uproot them, they devastate the entire biological diversity with impunity.
Since starting up Ecofuel Africa in 2009, Moses has seen the project take off. 1,500 farmers have invested in a kiln. They cost around $60. They are able to quickly recoup their investment by selling the fuel it produces. It works by turning organic waste like sugarcane into charcoal, which can then be used for cooking. It saves the forest and a few dollars too.
I used to use a sack of normal charcoal every day, which cost 30,000 Ugandan shillings. But with the biochar, I only spend 25,000, so I save 5,000 shillings every day.
3,500 families are buying biochar on a regular basis, a small but important step in stopping deforestation. Moses now hopes to get 40 million people using it, and even wants to replenish the forests by planting 250 million trees by 2020. And with his fuel, he has the energy to make it happen.
You're watching the Rise News Hour, and we're 15 minutes to the top of the hour. Just a reminder of our top story. And the US Secretary of State, John Kerry, says that the Syrian leader, Bashar al-Assad, has to go. In America's strongest warning yet, Kerry said that his regime had rained down rockets on the people of Aleppo in the last few days. And he condemned what he described as the indiscriminate killing of civilians. Now, another update on one of our other top stories, and a peace deal aimed at ending 2 decades of conflict in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo has been signed in Addis Ababa.
Leaders from across Africa's Great Lakes region had failed to ink the peace agreement last month after disagreeing on who will lead the new regional peacekeeping force. On Sunday, the deal was signed by leaders from Mozambique, Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania, South Africa, Democratic Republic of Congo, Congo Republic and South Sudan. UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon was on hand for the final negotiations.
This signing ceremony is a significant event in itself, but it is only the beginning of a comprehensive approach that will require sustained engagement. The framework before you outlines commitments and oversight mechanisms which aim at addressing key national and regional issues.
We vigorously commit ourselves to respect our obligations with this agreement we signed today, and we wish that all the signatories do the same.
500,000 people have been displaced by fighting between the DRC's army and M23 rebels in eastern Congo's North Kivu province. Rwanda and Uganda had been accused by UN experts of supporting the rebels, an accusation they deny.
Well, to tell us more about the DRC deal, Dr. Mahari Tadeli is a specialist in African conflict prevention. He joins us via phone from Addis Ababa. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, how likely is this peace deal going to work, given that it had rather a shaky start?
Yes, as all peace agreements in African continent, they may have problems of implementation, but this is the first time that we see a double achievement. The first one, that there is an agreement on peace enforcement mandated international neutral force that will be deployed in DRC, which will be part of the United Nations peacekeepers. At the same time, an agreement on comprehensive security, development and cooperation agreement among the 10 countries, and plus the 4 international organizations that will be working on this, the recent agreement and its implementation.
So, Dr. Tadili, who will head this peacekeeping force? Because that was one of the problems in the first place that stalled this particular agreement. Who will head it?
Well, that was the issue that was discussed last January during the AU summit. Now there is this outstanding issues has been resolved. So the African countries, in terms of command and control, will have a leadership role, both in terms of contribution of troops and also political direction. That's the reason why the mechanism, which allows for 11 countries plus 4 international organizations, including the United Nations and the African Union, will be important guarantors of this agreement. So for now, it will be part of MONUSCO, which is already operational with close to 20,000 United Nations troops. But there will be a special force that is a neutral international force composed of 4,000 troops, mainly drawn from SADC, Southern African Development Community countries. That will be very important in terms of dealing with elements that are destabilizing the DRC. So this is a different arrangement. As such, the command and control will be shared between the UN existing mission in DRC, MONUSCO, and at the same time, the SADC and the African Union will be leading the mission. So this is different in terms of arrangement. Of course, the finance issue has been also vexing criteria, and now there is an agreement because this will be as part of the United Nations. It will be treated as such, and that is very important too.
Dr. Mihari Tadili, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
And here's a reminder, you are watching the Arise News Hour. Now on to sports. And sports from the weekend, a roundup of the action from the weekend. They got to the League Cup final after beating premier clubs like Arsenal and Aston Villa. But in the end, Bradford couldn't go all the way. Their dreams were shattered in a 5-0 thrashing at the hands of Welsh side Swansea on Sunday night. Meanwhile, Paris Saint-Germain new signing David Beckham finally took to the pitch last night, but only for 16 minutes. His wife Victoria was there to see him set up the goal that sealed PSG's 2-0 victory over Marseille.
My first game, very happy to win a game against Marseille and in our own stadium. It was a very important win tonight.
How did you feel physically in the last quarter?
Physically, I felt good. I couldn't feel my feet were frozen. But apart from that, I was very happy to be part of the team tonight.
What did you think about the atmosphere?
And this year's Daytona 500 was won by Jimmy Johnson. It's the second time the Californian has taken home the $1.5 million prize. Danica Patrick also went down in the history books, becoming the first woman to start the stock car race in pole position.
Africa's biggest film festival opened in Burkina Faso on Sunday. The country's capital city saw 101 films vie for the top prize at the biannual event.
There's no red carpet, but plenty of glamour at the opening ceremony for the FESPACO Pan-African Film Festival. Horse riders, live bands and dancers entertain the crowd of film buffs and VIPs. The aim is to make more of a song and dance about the African film industry.
African states must make cinema a priority because more or less it's going backwards because of a lack of funding.
Around 170 films from all over the continent will be shown over the next week. They're vying for the Stallion of Yenenga Prize, awarded to the film that best shows Africa's realities. The festival's theme is African cinema and politics. Organisers say it's time for African stories to find a global audience.
Today we should not produce movies simply for national or local consumption. We must produce them to invade the world. This should be Africa cinema's challenge.
Jerome Evans, Arise News.
Our next guest is a self-professed filmaholic and founder of film website Flicks and the City. Jan Gilbert joins us live here in the studio. Jan, you called it a few weeks ago. You said Sugarman would go all the way. Well done.
I did. Thank you very much. I can't take all the credit, of course. A few people did make a film, which was very good. Yeah. No, it was an excellent film. I'm glad to see it won because, you know, as well as having a fantastic story, it also has a little British connection as well, which is producer Simon Chin, who was up there giving a speech at the Oscars, picking up his second trophy. He also won for Man on Wire a few years ago, a film he produced with James Marsh as director.
But
brilliant film.
The South Africans' dream, though, to do it, wasn't it?
Yes, it was indeed, and it was Rodriguez, who's this musician who disappeared in the 70s. Two South African fans, many fans of his in South Africa, followed him down the story that he'd disappeared over the years. Some people said he'd committed suicide on stage. All sorts of crazy stories were about him, and found that he was actually still living. And he came back to South Africa and was a huge success again. And now, fortunately, lots of concerts later, and is making some money from the royalties of the very successful songs he had that he didn't even know were popular.
He's 70 years old, isn't he?
Incredible.
Yeah, overall, Jan, overall. Any surprises?
It was quite a conventional awards, I think, this year.
There was something for everybody, wasn't it?
There was a little bit of something for everybody. I think Daniel Day-Lewis, everyone predicted, I think he was an absolute shoo-in. I think any actor any year who's in a film must think, oh my God, Daniel Day-Lewis has said he's coming back and making a film this year. I'm not in for an Oscar this year. Because he always seems to get this his third historic event for an historical film. Argo winning as well, fantastic film. Interesting to see not nominated, obviously, Ben Affleck for Best Director. Neither was Catherine Bigelow, although her film was up as well. Neither was Tom Hooper, although his film was also at Les Mis for Best Picture. So he's not the only one who was sort of snubbed, inverted commas.
But isn't it interesting? You win for Best Film, but you're not even nominated for Best Director. And that hasn't happened since Driving Miss Daisy.
Exactly, in 1990. Exactly where that picture did win, Jessica Tandy and Morgan Freeman film, but not the director. Wasn't even nominated. I mean, it just always sounds startling. And I know Ben Affleck was a little bit, haven't even been nominated, and yet was picking up many awards elsewhere, including the BAFTAs and lots of the Screen Guild Awards as well. So,
wow.
And what about the tribute to the Bond movies? I mean, Hollywood, or rather the Oscars, have really ignored Bond, treating it as a franchise. But they couldn't ignore it this year, could they?
No, not the 50th year. I mean, and as well, a fantastic film for Bond in the anniversary year. We've had Skyfall. And it always seems crazy in a way, not only that they've neglected Bond, but also we think that everyone always thinks of the Bond songs, as well as, of course, the guys who play Bond. And there have been some fabulous ones over the year, but not since, I think, 1981 has a Bond song actually been nominated for Best Original song, which is of course what Adele won this year for Skyfall, the song for the title.
Brilliant song.
Brilliant song.
And my best scene, my best scene, Jennifer Lawrence walking up.
Oh, didn't you feel for her? Oh, I knew as soon as
Talk about a wardrobe malfunction.
That's going to play forever, isn't it? For the next 50 years.
Exactly. As soon as that happened, I knew that was going to be in videos and GIFs all across the internet. That at the moment, exactly, moments later, people were making it. Exactly. So predictable, unfortunately. Yeah.
Was it a bit corporate? Was it a bit predictable this year, the Oscars? Do you think?
I suppose. I mean, you know, it's the film awards of the years, isn't it? Although we have many more with the Globes and the BAFTAs and the Screen Actors Guild and the Screenwriters and so forth every year. But it is the one. I suppose you never really expect it to be that out there. It's normally quite in line with kind of public opinion, quite in line with kind of critical opinion as well.
Yeah.
You see that with the films that were nominated, Lincoln and so forth, Daniel Day-Lewis and all of those. But, you know, we do like to see the odd little thing each year that's a bit different, I think.
I think we're going to remind us all of the falling over moment.
We also have to play. Here we go.
There we go.
We also have to play that shot.
There she is. There she is. Looking. Oh dear.
Oh.
No. No. And the actress, and the Oscar for the actress best recovery goes to.
She took it very well, didn't she?
She did.
Really I think, you know,
made her seem human, didn't
she?
it?
She did. You know, and Hugh Jackman came to her rescue, or tried to come to her rescue at least as well, which I think he came off very well with. But you know, she is a very down-to-earth human being, I think.
Literally down to earth.
Well, yes, quite literally with a bump.
Michael's joining us here. Thanks for joining us, Michael. You have something.
Well, it's just that, you know, Daniel Day-Lewis must be getting bored, you know, with picking up statues, you know.
I don't think you ever get tired of that.
It's like, for him, it's like going down to the supermarket, isn't it? And I've got a solution for this.
Go on.
Well, you see, the thing is that, you know, he immerses himself in roles, doesn't he? And everybody's bored witless, aren't they, round the set? He should run for president of the United States, right? Well, Ronald Reagan was an actor, wasn't he? I mean, it's a great role.
But who would he play?
Well, just himself. President Day-Lewis, I can see it now, can't you?
Well, he said he's been practicing for that role for 50 years, didn't he, when he made his speech?
Indeed.
He's also going to play Margaret Thatcher.